We had some technical issues today. In particular, we stopped the recording and I forgot to turn it back on again. So we missed part of the beginning. So I'm recording this separately and I'll merge it with the actual recording of the session and release it combined. So if it seems a little different as we jump a few minutes ahead, that's why. So in this session, we're talking about some of the changes that have occurred with AI since fall 2024. I know a lot of people were fairly familiar with what AI was capable of in the fall of last year, but things have changed a lot. And we've seen some really large changes over the summer and quite a few that have been gradually occurring over the past year. And if you would like a copy of these slides, scan that QR code there. You may want to pause the recording or type in this tiny URL. And that will give you a copy that you should be able to add to your Google Drive. And what we're going to be talking about are some new things on campus. One is that as of a couple weeks ago, we have campus access to Gemini. We have campus access to Notebook LM, and both of those are available in the Google menu. So if you open up Gmail or Google Drive or your calendar and you go to that little menu of apps, just click on it, scroll down until you get to see Gemini, or scroll down a little further and you can see Notebook LM. And Lumi is now integrated into Brightspace, and that gives us some additional tools to use AI in helping to create assessments within Brightspace. The next thing we're going to talk about are some of the changes that have occurred with the introduction of ChatGPT 5, which was released in late summer of 2025. And one of the things in particular that we're going to talk about is agent mode, which allows ChatGPT to work semi-autonomously, independent of the user, and you can program it to complete specific tasks for you, and it will do its best to accomplish that without actually direct commands or interactions from an initial prompt. Another thing that has happened related to ChatGPT is for those people who are using Microsoft's Copilot, that also was updated from the earlier version of ChatGPT 4 to ChatGPT 5 shortly after the release of ChatGPT 5. The other thing we're going to talk a little bit about is some of the developments that we've seen mostly in the past year, beginning to a large extent in fall of 2024 in multimodal AI. And the other thing we're going to talk a little bit about is the environmental impact of AI. A lot of people have been very concerned about the potential damage to the environment in terms of energy use, water used to cool servers, and so forth. And it turns out that we have some new measures of this, which suggests that the impact is not quite as large as was anticipated. In a recent study by Google, they found that a median prompt ended up using just a few seconds worth of, let me rephrase that, it just used a small proportion of a kilowatt hour, which turned out to be the equivalent of just a few seconds of streaming Netflix videos or other streaming video services. So it turns out that these tools are using quite a bit less energy than perhaps people were led to believe. And I should also note, though, that has come down fairly dramatically. In fact, a search today takes only 1/33 as much as it did when ChatGPT or when Gemini was first released. And that's been true across all of these platforms. Okay, so a little bit more detail that anyone, students and faculty who are in the Oswego EDU domain now have access to Gemini, Notebook LM, and Lumi, although Lumi is only available to faculty at this point within Brightspace. But along with that, there was a notification from the purchasing office earlier this week that it will no longer allow campus purchases of ChatGPT or any other AI platforms now that all faculty and students have access to Gemini. So if the college had been paying for accounts in your department for Copilot or for ChatGPT, that's not going to continue under purchasing rules because the budget is kind of tight, and it seemed kind of inefficient to support multiple platforms when we're already paying for one for everybody. So in terms of Gemini, it's available right from that Google menu, or you can click on this link if you've downloaded these slides, and it will take you directly. And just log in with your Oswego EDU address if you weren't already. A nice thing about having this campus license for Gemini for everyone is that we don't have to worry now about interactions being used to train the model. Gemini, given that we have the institutional license for this, keeps all the data internal to our local instance. So anything that you type in will not leave the campus instance and go into the general training. So, we probably should still use some care in what information we put into the system, but we don't have to worry, at least in theory, we don't have to worry about that information leaking out into other users outside of the campus. And 6 months ago, I think many people would have been disappointed with the license for Gemini. It started off way behind the other major large language models in terms of its speed, in terms of its capabilities, but it's been improving very rapidly. And in many types of things, it probably is one of the top probably one of the top two large language models in terms of its speed, its accuracy, and so forth. So they started a ways behind, but they've made some really good improvements now. And they've upgraded the image generation in Gemini to now use Google's Imagen 4, which is an improved image generation tool. And if you remember, a year or so ago, you could fairly easily detect AI-generated images because people would end up with, 6 or 7 or 8 fingers on a hand or 4 fingers on a hand and so forth. They've done quite a bit of improvement. All of the generative AI image generators, at least, are no longer exhibiting some of the strange things that used to occur. They've gotten much better. And one nice thing about using the campus license for Gemini is that everyone now has equal access. Before, if you assign ChatGPT or Claude or one of the other tools, some students would have free access. Others would have paid accounts, and people with paid accounts ended up being able to use more queries and would get better responses and so forth. Now everyone's going to be on an equal footing. So we don't have to worry about, we still have to worry about inequities among our students, but at least they will have equal access to these specific tools. Now, NotebookLM, we're going to just briefly mention some of its capabilities here, and then we'll switch over to the actual recording of the session. NotebookLM Notebook can contain up to, in principle, 50 website URLs, Google Slides, Google Docs, PDF files, audio files, or public YouTube sources that have a transcript. They have to be public because if it's shared only with individuals, they wouldn't want to be using that. If it's shared only with people with a link, for example, then the people sharing it are trying to share it just with specific people. And the concern is that if they allowed it to access any YouTube videos that you happen to have the link to, it might be sharing it beyond the intent of the original creators. So basically what it will do is it will take, again, up to 50 of these different sources, and it will analyze them and come up with some outputs. And we'll talk about those outputs in just a second. Now, it says 50. However, if you have a really long PDF, if you try to upload several really long books, it might not take 50 because there is a limit on the total capacity. Similarly, if you give it some very long videos, you might only be able to include 1 or 2 other items and so forth. So, you may run into some constraints, but if the material you have is fairly compact, fairly short, you can give it a lot of information that's used to train that specific notebook. And what NotebookLM will do is it will take all the information you provide it with and will generate audio or video summaries or briefing documents or quizzes. And it also allows users to query that notebook. So this is something that's used quite a bit. It has been used quite a bit by our students already. I know many of my students had used it, where they would upload information and get a nice summary of it, and also get the opportunity to self-test themselves on this materials. And a new feature that was added fairly recently is when you have multiple notebooks, you can now do queries that go across more than one, across two or more notebooks, which allows you to do some sort of synthesis between different notebooks and so forth once the notebooks have been analyzed and the briefing documents and so forth have been created. So it allows you to find some connections and some intersections among different notebooks that was not possible before. Before, everything had to be done within an individual notebook.
Okay. And Carlo had his hand up.
So John, when you mentioned on Notebook LM being able to go to YouTube videos, with videos that have transcripts, does it automatically access the transcripts?
Yes.
Okay.
And it has to be a publicly shared video or one that the transcript is accessible because, I forgot I don't remember what the exact restriction is, but it does access the transcript. I'm not sure if there's a license requirement on it.
So the other thing is just more of a comment. As we find these tools that are remarkably efficient and effective with condensing information, it does raise the question, and maybe this is just me being a little old school, about the struggle with accessing information and having to really plow through. I remember my wife showed me a picture of when I was in graduate school with much darker hair, and my desk was covered with articles and just reading through and trying to make sense. Once again, it might be the romantic, when I was a youngster kind of approach, but I do worry a little bit about removing that for so many people now and just kind of being able to jump over the struggle part.
It's a big concern, and it is something that many people have expressed concerns about because you do learn something through that process of wrestling with the material. The more cognitive the more cognitive effort you put into processing the material, the longer you remember it, and the more deeply you remember it, and the more likely you're able to transfer that information into new context. So that's the downside of this, and that's something you may want to talk to students about. On the other side of that, sometimes we get material, or students may get material that may be a little bit more advanced than they're ready for in some disciplines. I teach a seminar course every spring where students each week present journal articles, and sometimes those journal articles go a little above the heads of some of the people in there. And one of the things I've encouraged them to do is, if they find that some of it is challenging, to run it through Notebook LM or one of the other generative AI platforms and help deepen their understanding of some of the things that are done in those articles or those studies before they go through and read it in more depth. So, if they use this as an entire substitute for reading more challenging material, there's going to be a loss. But if they use it as a way, perhaps, of filling in the gaps in their prior knowledge, that may be very useful to help them move forward. So framing it can be helpful to students, reminding them that, this is a more superficial summary of the concepts that is designed to take complex concepts and simplify them. But, that may be, well, it can work for good or ill, as is true with pretty much anything related to AI. And Ben, you had your hand up.
Yes. Regarding the use of Gemini and these other platforms that are official, my experience with some of those in the past is they make up sources, literature sources. Compared to some other like sites, Perplexity, they'll give you the real source and you know that this is real, and they'll give you link to those real sources. Gemini is able now to give real sources, or the hallucination effect is still there?
Yeah, it's hard. We lose and we gain, and again, it all depends on how it's used. And one nice thing though about Notebook LM compared to just when students were putting things into generative AI or just asking questions about something is by default, the other generative AI platforms will suck in knowledge from all of its training. Here, they're only taking the knowledge from these specific sources, which can be helpful.
I think too, to your point, Ben, because it's a really good one about AI hallucinations and how problematic that is. But to your point, one of the things that I was just speaking with my students about yesterday was, okay, if you're going to use these tools, then the user needs to be consistently evaluating what the tools are giving you, right? Like you should not just accept it and then move on. So even if it is, like within Notebook LM, so far my experience with Notebook LM has been pretty good, like John mentioned, because you're the one inputting the sources. I haven't noticed any discrepancies as I listen, but you're right that with other platforms like Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, they might hallucinate sources, etc. So just encouraging your students to follow through, right? Like still talk to them about information literacy and the importance of making sure that this source really exists. Give them examples. Like I get the example that's several years old now, right? About that one lawyer who used ChatGPT to generate sources and then got called out publicly for it. Like I talked to my students about that yesterday and they were like, oh my gosh, that guy was publicly shamed. And I'm like, yes, he was, right? So like, I think just emphasizing the importance of information literacy and teaching students to evaluate the output is hugely helpful in response to that point.
Yeah, but it's less of an issue with this because it uses a closed training database of the materials you provide, and the information on the web in general is probably going to be less reliable than information that students are using to train this if it's things that their faculty provided to them. Since that case with the lawyer, there have also been cases of judges putting some false information or false precedents into their opinions, which also did not look very good. Any other thoughts on how this might be used? Either by students or faculty?
Well, I have a comment. I actually was using it earlier this year, and I put in some things from another SUNY website, and it wouldn't read them or wouldn't incorporate them. It said, got some error message of like something about you can't scrub this website.
Interesting.
And maybe some metadata that you can put in websites to prevent it from being used for training. That I'm not that familiar with, but I know that there are meta tags you can put in to keep things being added to search databases, and maybe it's the same effect here. But that's not common that, they find a lot of materials in general. But that's the first I've heard of that in this case. However, if you printed it as a PDF, and then if you entered that into it, it probably would work, because I don't think that metadata would be preserved in the PDF version. So that's a workaround, which is probably not their intention by trying to block access, but
And I think relative to Carlo's point, I'll turn it around 90 degrees and say, when I talk to students about going to graduate school, one of the things that, in the sciences, where in every field, the number of papers that are out there that are relevant or potentially relevant to your field grows hugely every year. So in 1985, it was possible to be comprehensive in an area. Neodymium isotopes, I can have read every paper and know what's in them. Now, there are thousands of papers on that topic, and there's no way that anyone is going to, if you start reading today and just do nothing but read for the next year, you're never going to get through those. And during that time, more papers have been added to the pile. So I see this as a means of potentially taking some of the problems that new graduate students might have with okay, here you're embarking on a project in this thing that you've never done anything with, or you may have had an undergraduate class that touched on this at some point, but now you're in it, and within a year, we're expecting you to be an expert in it. That could
It's
be
a
a
big
real
shift. And
a time saver and a sanity saver to a large extent.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just to, I don't know, clarify or expand on it, I think there's the issue of efficiency and how do students manage the amount of information coming at them, which is a real issue. I think of it more almost like from a developmental perspective, when you do hard things and you have to commit yourself to reading dense text that doesn't make sense the first, third, and 12th time. Even some literature that you have to read that you'd be disinclined to read because it's so hard. I just think there's something not only experientially to be gained from that struggle. I just think long term, it sets you up to be a better informed consumer, a more persistent learner. Like I said, to go along with the really valid point you were making about something we throw so much at students, and there's so much increasing in terms of the amount of information. I do worry a little bit about some of the benefits of that kind of cognitive muscle that gets built.
Yeah, I think that you've got to have both. I think that in order to be comprehensive in a field, this could help adding to the sort of knowledge store. But there's no doubt that the act of doing the reading, particularly if you set aside, these are the real important ones that you need to really weigh in on, and these other ones are less important, but collectively they are, they have weight.
And to deal with that in that seminar course, I also have students use hypothesis to annotate the text. So they have to go through and read the text and interact with it there. But this is a starting point, and it's sort of like pre-testing. We know that testing students before they learn something helps activate prior knowledge. It helps them see a framework and how things are connected. And by using a summary like this, it can provide a framework for students in which they can integrate new material more easily, rather than just seeing it as a whole series of pages of really confusing things. If there's an overview that they can then use to frame the rest of the results, that can be really effective. But there's some other ways perhaps we can use it, and I jotted a few down. One is if you want to use a UDL approach. It's a nice way of creating multiple means of representation. So you can take some of your course materials that are in text and convert them into audio format. So students who are commuting can listen to podcast versions while they're driving. They can see other summaries. They can interact with it as a shorter briefing document. They can self-test themselves, giving them some retrieval practice before they take exams and so on. And also, it's capable of translating this into dozens of other languages. So if students are English is a second language, it gives just one other way of connecting to the material. And pretty much all the AI platforms now do reasonably well in translation, which is great unless you're teaching languages, but then it's a little more challenging. But in any case, and we already talked a little bit about that, it can help people understand more complex journal articles and so on. So Lumi, we're not going to talk about that too much because there was a video. Yeah, there we go. There was a video on that from Tuesday that Kathy Dutton put together showing you how to use each of his capabilities. We're going to have a lot more once we move from the ancient version of Brightspace that we're on to the current version, which has been out there for 3 or 4 years now. So right now, though, it's limited. But what Lumi does is allows you basically to use the material you put in your courses, the content in your courses, to help create discussion prompts, to create assignments, or to create question banks that can then be used. And once they're created, you can then edit them, and you can, make them your own and, correct them and so forth. But again, because a training database is the course materials, it's much less likely to hallucinate than generative AI platforms that are trained on the whole mess of data that's out there. So it's, if you want to create some practice problems for students or some other materials, it's a quick and easy way to do that. It's a good way to integrate more retrieval practice in your classes and more space practice and so forth. And they don't have to be graded. Although if you put even tiny grades on them, students are more likely to use them. So any questions on this?
Just a quick one, which I should know the answer to this, but what's the data privacy situation with Lumi? I'm assuming because it's built into Brightspace that it's there, but I'm mostly thinking about courses that might have, kind of like sensitive material where students might, like a creative writing course, where a student might be sharing, or is Lumi only looking at like being your assistant, or is it looking at everything
choose
within
which
the class?
course materials are used for the training for it.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure if you just have it train on everything, it would take student submissions. I don't think it would, because it will not grade student work at this point. So my guess is it probably is not reading student submissions and using that for training, because that would probably generate a lot of hallucinations in many classes. But basically, you get to pick what the source of material is. It could be an entire module of content you provided, or it could be just specific readings and so forth. So if you have some articles posted in there and you want to generate discussion questions about it, you can generate a number of those, and you can choose the level of Bloom's taxonomy and so forth, when you generate it. So you can get some lower level questions, some more higher level analysis, and so on. And again, you don't have to use them, but it gives you a starting point, which often allows you to be a little more efficient, giving you more time to provide feedback to students, perhaps. Now,
so can it select just certain chapters, like from the digital text that's associated with your course?
That's
like
a good question.
Specific, or
I haven't tried that. One way of doing that is, if you have a digital text, you could always break up the chapters into separate files or separate, PDFs or HTML files or whatever, and then you could just select those. But I don't know if you can select specific chapters or sections of a document or of an electronic text. That's something that we'd have to experiment with, and I haven't done that yet.
I haven't had a chance to mess around with it.
So, but it would be, if you find out, let us know. It would be good to know. But that's a really good question, because it would be nice to have that option. But in the classes where I have a book that I wrote and some other things, I usually break it up into small chunks and keep just those chunks in that module. And that way I wouldn't run into this problem in any of my classes. But if you have an OER or a text from, inclusive access tests or something similar, where students have to make those decisions themselves in terms of what to read, I don't know. I wish I had an answer. And when we move to the new one, there'll be more interactions where there'll be the possibility of letting students generate their own practice questions, things, and so forth. It's going to have more features, but I think we're at least a year or two away from upgrading to that. So, okay, but watch Kathy's recording if you want to find the details. But basically, whenever you get to a portion of a gradable activity where that's there, you get that little sparkle icon. You just click on it and you give it tell it what you want to do, and it will do it for you. And it does a pretty decent job. Now, ChatGPT 5 came out about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4, and it's got some really nice features. It started off with some problems. In fact, they retracted some of it right away. For a while, ChatGPT offered a whole series of models with GPT-4 or GPT 3.5, where you could choose what type of processing you want, whether you wanted slow and careful processing, or if you just wanted standard processing and so forth. With ChatGPT 5, they automatically select the level of processing your queries get, depending on the complexity and the type of queries. And that broke down really badly the first few days, and they reversed that for a bit. But now it's functioning and it's doing a little bit better. But what will happen still sometimes is, if you have a really complex problem, particularly mathematical and scientific questions or things with more complex notation, it will generally default to the slower processing or the deeper processing approach. But sometimes if it's busy, if there's a lot of users, it will go to the lower quality models, and that will give you very quick results that are much more likely to be inaccurate. So it's getting better with that. It's doing better in terms of sorting, and it's become much more efficient than it used to be. So that will probably continue to improve as they keep tweaking the parameters and so forth on that. But well, it's gotten better. The searches are much more efficient in terms of energy and other things. They use like 1/30th or so, 1/40th of the queries that the energy cost of queries when ChatGPT first came out. The algorithms have become more efficient and so forth. And this is the thing I really wanted to talk a little bit about, agent mode. And the agent mode in ChatGPT is where you can set something up to run by itself. Basically, you can ask it to do tasks. If you gave it access to your computer files or your email, you could have it go through and read in the summary emails, or perhaps delete emails that seem to be spam or other things. But this is one use that about a day or two after this came out that David Wiley shared. And let's see, I don't think it was very long. 3 minutes. There we go.
Oh, God.
Why are we not hearing it? Are you guys hearing it remotely? Maybe there was no audio. There's this prompt at the top.
Not log in using the credentials you provided.
You notice the problem solving that it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
It tries to find workarounds if something's not working. It checked to see what was due, found the assignment, and now it's attempting to do this. And you notice how it's giving you an update if you happen to be monitoring it. You could also schedule this to do this without your intervention. So you could just ask it to do this once a week, for example, to check what assignments are due, complete the assignments, and then log out. Well, this one he has monitored. So. So you see the capability of the agent mode. Now, he was able to do this by, I would be really cautious, students may not be, about putting my username and password into an AI system, which is not terribly secure. However, he has his own instance of Canvas running, so he was able to create a temporary password and so forth. But there was a follow-up video, and I couldn't find it because for some reason there were many responses to his posts about this. One of the follow-up videos was an instructor doing the same sort of thing, asking it to log into his instance of Canvas and then checking to see what assignments needed to be graded, grading the assignments, posting the grades, and provided written feedback on those written assignments, and then logging off when it was all completed. So, I mean, conceivably, we could get to the point where with online classes, AIs could create the assignments for faculty, AIs could respond to it, and then AIs could grade that work without any human intervention other than writing that initial prompt. And if you notice, his prompt was just a couple of sentences. You know, you could get past some of those things where you had to say yes by just including that on the prompt. If you, saying that if you are asked for permission, yes, please submit it, and so forth. And then the agent will just do that. So it's a really interesting capability that we didn't have, say, a month ago. Ben, I think your hand is up.
Yes. Does Gemini have agents too?
No, I don't believe so.
I haven't heard about them.
So yeah, but again, ChatGPT costs $20 a month, which is what many students were paying for Chegg back before we had AI tools available. And to do, and oops, I got to log in first. I did not give it my, okay, 1 second. I just want to show you how to get to it in there. And I do have a paid account. And to be honest, I haven't checked to see whether the free accounts have access to agents. I don't know if they do.
I'll check when I go back.
Where did it go? Okay. I was playing with some other thing. Oops, that's not it. That was just an attendance list. It wasn't grade data. And it seems, here we go. It's buried under several other windows here.
I see John's grocery list come over the screen.
No grocery list. Okay, but if you go in and you are using it, you can just go up here, if I remember correctly, and choose a drop down and agent. Huh?
I thought it was in the.
Oh, it's right. It was. I thought it was in the prompt, but
yeah.
But I'm not seeing it there now. This is going into voice
Click
mode.
the plus.
Maybe that was it. Except. Oh,
it did.
It did.
It went away.
Okay. No.
Agent mode.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Click on the plus. Go to agent mode. And then I did experiment with this a little bit. What I did was I had created an agent to go out and check for any recently published research in the last month on teaching and learning and working papers, journal articles, and posted or references posted on social media, to find links to the resources and to verify that the links work. And then it did, and it took a while. And in some cases, it couldn't find the articles, and it was going through the same sort of process to say, I am checking now on PubMed to see if this article is available, because a lot of articles get posted there and so forth. I'm doing a web search to check for the availability of the article. And basically, you give it a prompt and you just let it run in the background, or you can schedule it so that it will happen at different times and so on. So it's an interesting issue. Any thoughts or questions or concerns?
I put it in the chat. I thought was an interesting comment. I found that video, John, and David, the creator, added one comment, and he said, For those of you who are concerned about this video showing students how to use generative AI, do their homework for them, they already know how to do it. It's only faculty who don't know.
Yes, and if you do a search for how to use AI to do any sort of to respond to any type of questions, you'll find hundreds of videos and so forth showing how to use various AI tools to do it. So that's a really good point. And yeah. So, so that I thought was kind of an interesting new feature. And it can be really, really useful by automating more complex tasks and freeing up more time for us to do other things. But it's also just a little bit scary, perhaps. Why is it not closing? Well, let me see if I can.
Is there like a free trial period for it, or do you have to?
It's just, if you have a paid account, it's built in. I'm not sure if it's available in there's a limit. I think you get like 30 a month or something like that. And I'm just trying to open up the
Mouse is in.
It's not available for the free ones. I think the agent mode is for those who are paying.
Okay, it may be just a paid account. So,
Yes.
but again, students would be able to get, even if this would just minimize, it would be kind of nice. That's just wrong. I want to get back to those slides.
Whole tab.
I was gonna say, is there a way to keyboard it to make it the window go away? Like
There we go. Okay.
shortcut.
I don't know why it did that, but in any case, that I thought was an interesting new feature, and now that's not advancing. Oh, there it is. Okay. Another thing is, and this we have done workshops on in the past, because a lot of this has been available since at least the fall, multimodal AI. And that allows real-time interactions with AI on laptops, smartphones, tablets, and so forth, and also smart glasses, where more and more variety of these are coming up, which also can be a little bit challenging. But what they will do basically is, well, there are a lot of tools out there, and we demonstrated some of these in past workshops, where you can create virtual clones of yourself, where it will you'll be recorded saying something. Let's say while you're on the camera, it'll give you a script to read, and it will ask you to use various facial expressions, and it will take photos of you, and then it creates a relatively realistic image. The motions aren't always very accurate, but they're getting better and they're getting smoother. Some of the more interesting ones is that if you're teaching a class where students are participating over Zoom, you can appear to be there, where you're using an AI to generate what you say, and it's generating a video representation of you without you necessarily being logged in. A simple one is the Pickle one, which we have demonstrated before. And the way that works is that it's actually your voice, because the voices are getting better, but then they still hesitate a little bit. But with Pickle, you could appear to be sitting at your computer in a classroom, or at home at a desk, while you're driving to a party, or while you're laying around at a beach or on vacation somewhere. And basically, the avatar will look like it's you speaking, and the lips will be synced with what you're saying. And there are some nice videos out there of that, where people are talking to themselves, or where one AI avatar is interviewing another one about some topic. And all the responses on both sides of the conversation are generated by AI. So it's kind of amusing, but this is getting better and better. So, even if one of the things that came up in the discussion, I think it was yesterday, was that, well, maybe you could, if you're not sure if students are going to be submitting work using AI, maybe you could have them create a video or a presentation. That can all be done without any human intervention, other than giving the AI a prompt, and it will then generate the video and create an image of them presenting it, and can also create slides that they use in the background for the presentation, again, without any real human intervention. And that was one of the things we showed in a workshop a while back, where people said, well, create an ad for SUNY Oswego, and my image was up there reading it, a script created by the AI giving an ad for SUNY Oswego with some images generated by the platform. Just to, it's kind of amusing.
With the Zoom option, could you have multiple copies of yourself to go into the breakout rooms? And
in theory, you could. And people have been experimenting with some of these, in particular with HeyGen and synesthesia, to see how many instances themselves they could have in a session. And in one case, I think they had close to 100, because they were just trying to push it to the limits and see what was feasible. But but there is some limit to the amount of time you can use on those, unless you pay a tremendous amount for them. But another thing that many people may not be aware of is that there's a really large number of Chrome plugins that have been created specifically for remote instruction or for asynchronous instruction, where these are just a few. There's dozens of them out there. Some of them are free, or at least free for a limited number of uses. Others there's a paid account for. But basically, if you're using Chrome to access a course, it will see whatever questions are on the screen and give you a response to it that you'll see that you can then type in, or I think some of them will let you paste the answer in if it's, if it's a short answer or whatever. But you can play with these, and they're getting fairly good, which means any time we give a student tests that they can take on their own computer, they could very easily use a plugin to do all that for them. And by the way, if you are doing, I don't think anyone here is still doing this, but if you're using any of the remote proctoring services, like Proctorio or any of those others, I think here people were using Honorlocks, and he had bought into that.
PSI.
PSI. If you do a search for how to defeat those, and it will give you things. And one of the ways of doing it is to use something like Pickle, because they're monitoring the camera. But if the camera you're set is one that uses the simulation, you could be there skimming through a book. You could be there with your smartphone or a tablet or another laptop, and it would look like you're sitting there dutifully answering the questions. And there's a lot of other ways, but it's getting easier and easier to defeat these systems. And another thing, which is getting to be, I remember there was a lot of discussion in the college a while back when we had smartwatches out there with the argument that people will put all the answers on the little screen that will contain like 20 or 30 words. I wasn't terribly concerned about that. But with AI glasses, you could have whole documents or chapters of books that are visible, that would be visible to you, but would not be visible to the instructor who is proctoring your exam in person. So, yeah. And if you combine that with, some of the image recognition things and so forth, it's going to get, we don't see a lot of that yet, but one person reported they had caught 2 cases already. This was in the summer of 2025, but I don't think it's that common yet. But because
it's unfortunate because it is advantaging a already advantaged
group. People who can afford the smart glasses and the software and so forth.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that the smart glasses also can they record as well?
And, yes.
So what are the what would the rules about that be in, like a college classroom? Like if someone is using their smart glasses to record a class, but no one is aware of that, like what
in New York State, it's a one-party consent state, which means as long as one party consents to the recording, it is perfectly legal.
Yeah.
And if you're the person doing the recording, you are consenting, or you wouldn't have done the recording. I mean, other states require that all parties consent, but not New York.
The record, adding on to that, they can't do things with that recording. They can't sell it or anything.
Okay.
Right.
But they could record without anybody knowing.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you have the same exam offered at different times, which is something you should never do anyway, because students have lots of ways of capturing that, it would give people, if someone couldn't be there because of an illness that happened to come up on the day of the exam, which happens very often, especially in large classes. There've been some studies of that. It's like 40 or 50 times more likely that people come up with sudden illnesses on those days. But in any case, you could always get a video recording of the exam, which you could then distribute. Again, there would be ethical issues, there would be academic integrity issues if they were caught, but it's not so easy to catch someone when you don't actually see anything other than a person sitting there with smart glasses taking an exam, right? So, one of the most popular things on the GPT store, which is available for anyone with even a free ChatGPT account, is the Humanizer chatbot. And that will take output from generative AI, including ChatGPT, and will rewrite it in a more human format so that it's not going to be detected by AI detectors. AI detectors have always been pretty poor, and they generally don't keep up with newer releases of these things. And the only people who are caught by AI detectors in general are students who write really poor prompts that generate nonsense, and then it's easy, or generates fairly generic output that is recognizable, where it's not very substantive. But when people write more elaborate prompts where they interact with the AI and they ask for further processing, or they ask it to be written in a different voice, AI detection has always broken down. But now, when you run it through Humanizer GPT or any of dozens of other paraphrasing or other apps, it becomes virtually impossible to detect. And the only way you might detect someone is if you recognize the writing is different from other writing that the student has done in your class, which is not always that easy to do in demonstrating. We talked about that a bit in yesterday's workshop. So, so that's out there, and I think it's still the most popular app, isn't it? Or the GPT. It's up in the top 5.
It's up there, yeah, for sure. And like I'll say, like I did successfully detect and had conversations with students over the summer about, ChatGPT and their writing and whatever. One of them, I mean, I do still think that some students will write a not very good prompt and put it in and then not read the output and then submit the output. So, one of them over the summer was saying, like, one thing you could do if you want to learn more about this, right? Like, so sometimes I think it becomes super obvious if they don't proofread, but it is, I mean, it's getting really muddy out there.
Yeah, and it's the students who are struggling the most, who are most likely to do that. And I had this way back, and I've mentioned this in past workshops, when these things first came out, I had a student who submitted something that, because that was when there was a training day cutoff on it, and I had questions about the current data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, back when we had a Bureau of Labor Statistics reporting current data, and they don't get fired for doing that. But in any case, what happened was the response to the query, or to the discussion prompt was, as an AI tool, I do not have access to this information, but you may find it there. And that was copied and pasted directly into the discussion post. But better students who use AI more carefully, it's really hard to detect. So we're running pretty much out of time, but here are just some things perhaps to think about as ways we might want to adapt to that. Maybe, students are going to be using AI for their future. It's not going to go away. Maybe using AI productively and ethically may be integrated into how we teach and so forth. We've talked about that. Stephanie's talked about that a lot in past one. Another is, instead of grading the output or the product of assignments, you could ask them to submit the prompts that they use and to evaluate the process they use to get to the final version, so that you're really teaching them how to use AI more effectively as a tool, perhaps, and getting to a higher quality product. Another is obviously in-person proctoring and just take their glasses away, perhaps. Another thing we've talked about a lot, and this came up yesterday, is a tilt approach from Marianne Winklemas, where basically we're transparent about why we're doing things, so that students see that these are assessing skills that they should be developing as part of the course, and making explicit why they need to develop these skills, and remind them perhaps that using AI is not helping develop those skills. Another thing is, and it came up yesterday in many sessions, co-developing policies with students, where if students come up with ways in which some uses of AI are appropriate and some are not, then perhaps, they may be more likely to buy into that. And here's the environmental impact. But this came from a research project that Google just did, where a median, the one right in the middle of all their search data, uses about 0.0003 kilowatts of energy, consumes between 0.25, which is just a couple of drops of water, up to 5, depending on how it's measured. Oh, that should have been of the amount required a year ago. So a year ago, it was using 33 times as much energy to generate prompts. And it's 8 to 10 seconds of streaming Netflix. So, I hear all these people complaining about the energy use and how they don't want students to use AI because of all this. But, as long as they don't watch streaming video on Netflix or Hulu or Disney or any of those other services, or even cable services for that matter, that it may be a little hypocritical. But in general, we've seen some dramatic improvements in all the platforms and how the amount of energy required to generate them.